where the wild winds run, where the skies stretch wide and kiss the sun. The sagebrush whispers, the rivers hum. This land's a story just begun. Wyoming calls, where the heart beats free. Mountains rise and dreams run deep. Past the borders, past the sign, there's a world alive beyond the fence line. Boots hit gravel and the prairie sings with every hoofbeat. The frontier rings from ranchers' hands to miners' veins. The spirit of the West remains. Wyoming calls, where the heart beats free. Mountains rise and dreams run deep. Past the borders, past the sign, there's a world alive beyond the fence line. So come ride with me through the dust and time. Find the soul of Wyoming beyond the fence line, beyond the fence line. Beyond the fence line, beyond the fence beyond the fence line, where the wild winds run, where the skies stretch wide and kiss the sun.
All right. Hey, good morning. Happy Tuesday, January 20th, Wyoming. So glad you're here joining me. Guys, this morning is the episode, right? If you're going to watch any of my shows or share any of them, I want to encourage you to share this one. Today I'm going to talk about Wyoming elections. You know, this is not about my opinion, you guys. It's about the facts. An objective look at Wyoming elections, where we've been, where we're going, new legislation coming. We've been fed this constant narrative that we have problems in Wyoming elections, voter fraud and lack of security and integrity. We need tighter rules, and apparently we need 80, yes, you heard that right, 80 pieces of legislation related to elections in 2025 and 2026 to address all of these issues that we have in Wyoming. Today is about seeking the truth. The main reason for a lot of what we see going on is, well, perhaps we don't like the outcome. So if we don't like the outcome, we're going to find a way to control it, right? This is about cutting through the political narrative, the noise that we hear. And while on the national stage, there might be some pretty serious issues with elections in Wyoming, the issues are not as big as we are being told. So today we're going to talk about election fraud in Wyoming. We're going to talk about runoffs. We're going to talk about hand counting. We're going to talk about ballots. We're going to talk about making it harder for independents to run in Wyoming. We're going to talk about extended primaries and more. So first, before I get started into the issues, I want to talk about where I stand, because I think it's really important to put into context where I stand on elections so that we're clear. So, where do I stand? Wyoming residents who are U.S. citizens should be the only people voting in Wyoming elections, whether it's local elections or federal elections. I think we can all agree, and you should, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, that those are the people who should be the only people voting in elections. I think it's a given. And did you know that in Wyoming we already have strict voter ID laws? The Wyoming Constitution already says United States citizens are the only people that can vote in Wyoming elections. So that's already something that we have. The other thing that I want to talk about where I stand before I get into these election issues in Wyoming, and I also want to say something positive about the Secretary of State's office as well, is the issue of crossover voting, where we flip-flop between Republican and Democrat in order to, mess with results in another party's primary. I'm glad we're addressing crossover voting. So ID and addressing crossover voting, those are two basic principles that I think really we all should get behind. But so what about the rest of this election legislation and this, the stuff that we're told? Before I get into that, I want to go ahead and, I'm very, very, very thankful for the Wyoming Secretary of State Grays and his office for all of the voter list maintenance and stuff that they are doing. It is my hope, that we are not removing people from the rolls that should be voting in Wyoming. After all, 60% of us in this state have come here, right? A lot of us have come recently. And so a lot of us might have out-of-state driver's licenses. I remember that I got removed from voter rolls in a state called California, without my knowledge. So I hope we're not removing anyone from our voter rolls without knowledge. I'm hoping our local clerks are doing their homework and we're keeping our voter rolls clean. But I do want to applaud that effort, that we're keeping our voter rolls clean and fair in the great state of Wyoming. So, controlling outcomes. I've got a lot of slides to share with you guys today, and I'm going to share these with you so that we can just kind of have some fun today with the show, and I'll share some slides with you. So, let's talk about controlling outcomes. This slide I'm showing you right now, it shows a crack, right? You see elections up there in the middle, in the crack. And then we have these two parties that want to control the outcome. And they're passing legislation and they're doing things. And by the way, don't think that this is not happening in Wyoming. We like to say it's not happening in Wyoming. It is. It's happening in Wyoming. And we, the people, are beginning to notice this. And I'm going to talk about this today. We don't like an outcome, so we're going to control it. Now, if the people don't like an outcome, we have the right to change it. Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution says that the power is inherent in the people. All power is inherent in the people. And all free government is founded on their authority and instituted in their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of these ends, they have at all times the inalienable and indefensible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such a manner as they think proper. Now, when politicians want to control the outcome, we better start talking about it. We better have the conversation. We better share the truth with our friends here in Wyoming. And that's why we're having this conversation today. So let's talk first about fraud in Wyoming. All right, so fraud in Wyoming is about as often as pigs fly is how often we have fraud in Wyoming. And I said, Joseph, no, you can't say that. You can. We have fraud, and we have to address it. Well, I can't say it. I can't say it because the facts actually support the fact that we have very little to no fraud in Wyoming. So maybe we have enough fraud in Wyoming to where maybe it's more often than pigs fly, quite possibly. But I'm going to actually show you information on fraud in Wyoming because I think that that's a really, really important place to start. This next slide is from the Heritage Foundation. I'm going to go ahead and get myself out of the way here so that you can see this. These are the actual criminal cases since 1982 until today when it comes to actual proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, went to court cases in Wyoming. So for the last 43 years, we have had 4, yes, that's right, 4 cases of proven. Oh, I don't know why my screen share went away. Let me pop that back up again. We've had 4 cases of proven fraud in Wyoming. Okay, 4, just 4. And that's the Heritage Foundation. That's what the Heritage Foundation says. Okay. So, and I'm trying to get that slide back up. My slide stopped there. 4 cases of fraud proven. So that's, if you wanted to average it, that's 1 case of fraud per decade. So we don't have no fraud, but we have very little in the case of actual reporting, actual data. The next screen share that I'm going to show you is a Freedom of Information request that was made, and it showed us about fraud in Wyoming. And here in this graph, you could see there was 80 total reports to the Secretary of State of voting issues in Wyoming between 2023 and 2025. You can see we've got some intimidation here. We've got some issues with some mailers. We've got some issues with some improper, campaigning, some unqualified candidates, some issues with some PACs. The biggest piece of this pie is mistakes and or wrongdoing at the election official level. Now, most of these were just mistakes, right? And by the way, there's 80 in total is what made up this graph, but most of these were just mistakes. And they were corrected by safeguards that we already have in place here in the state of Wyoming. So then you got this voter fraud up here, 7.6%. This was 6 total reports of voter fraud. 2 of the 6 were related to the same person. So really 5 instances of voter fraud in the last 3 years, 3 years. And these are still being looked at. To my knowledge, nothing's been done as far as criminal cases in those 5 cases. So one might ask, well, do we have unreported fraud? And you know what? It is possible, you guys, that there probably is unreported fraud in Wyoming. You have humans involved, and you have a couple of 100,000 people that vote. You probably will have a little teeny tiny bit of voter fraud. But the data supports this as being essentially a non-issue when it comes to voter fraud. So anyone telling us that we have a huge problem in this state is not telling us the truth. It's a political talking point, really to get us to be afraid to do what they want. And that's what we're going to talk about next is some of these legislative changes to elections. So let's talk about runoffs. And I think the best way to do that, because these runoffs are being billed for really the purpose of the highest executive level positions in the state of Wyoming. So let's talk about runoff legislation and let's talk about the reality of closed primaries with runoffs. Okay. So I'm going to take the last three governor's elections as an example for this scenario. So here we're going to have, here is the primary results from 2014. Would a runoff have changed the results of this election? Well, no. And let me tell you why. Statistically, runoffs have a much lower participation rate than the primary. As high as 50% or more people do not show up at the poll. So a lot of these folks here would in these bottom columns would not show up. You'd probably here in these bottom columns would not show up at all. But you have like a 50% less participation rate. And one might argue, well, if we gave all of these votes to him and maybe got some more people involved, Taylor Haynes might have beat Matt Mead. Probably not. A runoff election would not have changed probably the 2014 election results. So now let's look over at 2018. So here is the 2018 election results. Now, this election is interesting because we have so many candidates in 2018. And one might argue, well, if we had had a runoff in 2018, Mark Gordon might not have run. But I would argue this. First of all, you're going to have a participation drop off from all of these candidates, and they might all endorse one of these two gentlemen. I can't predict, maybe most of these would have, endorsed Foster. But then when you account for a voter participation and drop off, and that the most energized base would have been his voters, it's very likely in the 2018 2018 election that this would have been the same outcome. Probably, because these two bases end up being the most energized bases of all the electorate. Okay, so maybe in that election. Now let's look at the 2022 governor's election. Pull that up. Now, would a runoff have changed this election? Based on statistical data, and there's a lot of studies on this, you guys, a runoff would not have changed, likely not have changed, the results of this election. He had over 60% of the vote. Now, you might say, Joseph, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So the last three governor's elections would likely have not been changed by a runoff election. Let's talk more about what runoffs really are and what they do. So when you pair, by the way, almost no states pair a closed primary with a runoff. There are a few instances where this does take place, but it's under very stringent rules. And it says basically if nobody in the primary gets 30%, right? 30% of the vote, then we would have a runoff. Well, if you look at the last three governor's elections, if you use the criteria that any other state uses, I think it's only 2 states, right, that do this. In neither case would we have triggered a runoff because the leader got more than 30% of the vote. There is no case really in the US where you could make a case for closed primaries and runoffs in the scenario that Wyoming is presenting. So what does a closed primary with runoff do? Let me break this down for you guys. And you guys can say, I'm not in favor of runoffs. And I'm going to explain to you why I'm not in favor of runoffs. Because here's what happens. In a closed primary, only registered party members are allowed to vote. We know that, right? And that means a large chunk of the public, the independents, the unaffiliated, the people who don't wear the party label, they're locked out of the primary. So they don't get to vote. So then they come to the general election comes around, and of course that field is narrowed to a person and a person and all that. And the primaries made that decision, and it's a highly partisan group. But then you add a runoff in between the primaries and the general, and here's what happens. While it sounds good in theory, the reality is that turnout for runoffs is like I said earlier, 50% less in most studies, in most cases, which means that you have very fewer voters participating in that process, and they're usually the most political, the most organized, and the most connected to the party or party structures. This means that the second round does not broaden the participation. In fact, it shrinks it even more. So what happens? First, you have a closed primary that filters out everyday voters in different ways. Then you have a runoff that filters out even more of them. And then the final decision is made by the smallest, most partisan slice of the population. So that is a system really that rewards the insiders, the incumbents, the well-funded candidates who already have the recognition and the institutional support. And it discourages new voices, independents, and anyone who doesn't fit into that party box. So I am not a supporter of our current system of closed primaries and then adding runoffs in between for those reasons. So that's my thoughts on runoffs. And now let's talk about making it harder for independents to get on the ballots. You guys may or may not know this, but in 2025, they tried to pass a piece of legislation that made it almost 3 times as hard for independents to get on the ballot at the state level. Changing this requirement from 2% of signatures to 5% of signatures. Now, I want to ask you, why would you do that? I mean, independents already, by and large, do not win elections in Wyoming or anywhere for that matter, right? So why would you need to or want to make it almost 3 times harder for them to get on the ballot? Let me tell you why. I'll go back to my cracks slide here. The party knows that they're in trouble. The parties know that they're in trouble. They know that there are cracks in their walls, these walls that they built around elections, and they want to fill those cracks. Or people like me, or people who desire to run for office outside of what they can control. Because this is about control, you guys. They can't control me because I'm not running with the party. I am a threat to them. People who walk through this path of independence are a threat to the party. So they are seeking to make it 3 times, almost 3 times harder for independents to get on the ballot. There can only be one reason that you would do that, folks. Especially since, in history and theory, they have a very, very hard time winning anyways or getting on the ballot with the current 2% requirement to get on the ballot. So why would you do that? Why would you make it harder? I want you to ask yourself that question. I want you to just be objective about that. Why would you make it harder for independents to get on the ballot? Very, very interesting. This is a piece of legislation coming up again, I think for the second time now, that they may try to pass to fill those cracks. Now let's talk a little bit about hand counting and paper ballots, because I think that this is kind of it. We've talked about runoffs. We've talked about independents getting on the ballot. Let's talk about hand counting and paper ballots. So first of all, where do I stand on paper ballots? You know what, you guys? If we want to do paper ballots in Wyoming, let's knock ourselves out. That's fine. I have no issue with, you know what, we don't trust the machines to vote and all of that. And so let's go to paper ballots and do that. But now there's a real push to also implement hand counting. What are the facts between, statistically, the facts between hand counting and machine counting? Guys, there are decades, and I say decades, of studies on this issue. So let's talk about this. So These decades of studies show that hand counting has 3 to 5 times more instances of error versus machine counting. It's just a fact, especially in large elections. Now, here in Wyoming, because we have a relatively small population, we may be able to have a slightly better statistic. But the statistics are the error in hand counting is still low, but it is between 1 and 2%, whereas machine counting errors for paper ballots are somewhere around or a margin of error of less than a quarter percent. So you're going to have more accurate results with a paper ballot if you do machine counting. And you guys can go study it yourself. You know what? Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. But this is what the statistics say. And you know what? Okay, so we do paper ballots. Maybe we machine count, and maybe you call for a special hand counting, situations to double check and to do that, to see if there's been an error, because we're not flawless, you guys. And I'm going to wrap this up with talking about this idea that we can get it to no errors. I mean, it's impossible. But you know what? Sure, we want to go to paper ballots, but let's think about this hand counting and the cost of that too. Now think about what a great job our county clerks and our volunteers already do in elections. But then we've got to add hundreds of more people, right, into the mix in Wyoming elections to hand count. And you know what? People make mistakes. I make mistakes. So human error may produce more error in Wyoming elections if we just hand count everything. It may, according to statistics and according to the myriad. I mean, we're talking about, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of studies that have been on this. The machine always is more accurate in counting paper ballots. I guess you got to pick and choose. I mean, one thing you might think about too is what's to keep anyone really from hand counting and going, oh, that's not my guy, but I'm going to put it in my guy's column. I mean, we could have the same exact scenario in hand counting as far as cheating goes as you might have with a digital machine. It's just done in a different way. So I think we got to pick our battles in this, you guys. People will make mistakes in hand counting, and it'll likely be more mistakes than a machine counting paper ballots would make. We do want election integrity. We do want, it will never be error free because people are involved, right? I mean, I guess you remove the people, right? And maybe you would have no errors. But the bottom line is we make mistakes. I'm actually going to I want to pull up that one graph again, if I can find it here real quick. Because it showed us that most of the errors that were made in Wyoming elections. Oh, you know what? I don't have that graphic handy again. I don't know where that graphic went. Anyway, it showed us on the graph that. I know where it is. Oops, sorry guys. I want to try to find that graph again because I do want to pull it up. It showed us that the primary errors in Wyoming elections are these areas of elected official errors. Oops, I'm sorry, that went away real quick. Let me pull that up. Are these areas of mistakes or wrongdoing by officials, most of which get corrected, right, with the safeguards that we already have in place. So no election system in Wyoming is going to be flawless. But I want you to ask yourself, why are we making it harder for independents to run? Are closed primaries with runoffs tied to them really best for the voice of the people in Wyoming? And my answer is no. My answer is no. That is not the best for the people for Wyoming. It is the best, though, for the party and those who toe the line and the people who stick in the echo chamber and just do what they're told. Does fraud exist in Wyoming? I talked about that. It is almost non-existent, and the numbers support that. Any dialogue to the contrary of that is not the truth. It's a political talking point just making you afraid, and they want you to do what, they want you to do what you want. I talked about hand counting and paper ballots. Totally fine if we want to go to paper ballots, but let's think about this hand counting thing. Maybe we do it from time to time, but it technically is technically has a slightly higher, or really, 3 or 4 times higher error rate than machine counting of paper ballots. So let's wrap this up. There's one more thing. One more thing, and I'm not sure there's a piece of legislation about this, and that's extending the primary season so that we can get to know our candidates more. Again, I think this further favors those that are already in politics and people that play by the party rules in the echo chambers. Because, boys, people like me, you extend the primary season, that's going to make it really, really hard to run for office. So I'm going to wrap up with this, and I'm going to just encourage you with this. No election system will be flawless. We should, however, strive for excellence. And those who in Wyoming elections right now today across this state, our county clerks, the volunteers, the people at the polling places, do an unbelievable job already. Adding unnecessary processes, adding cost, adding more administration to Wyoming elections actually has the opposite effect. You will have less transparency, less free, and it will reduce voter participation. I don't believe that's the direction that we want to go. So be aware. And you know what? Fact check me on this today. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research. And if I'm wrong, correct me. But this is what I've seen, and this is what is happening. So the people of Wyoming need to protect their elections. And I hate to say it, in cases, we have to protect our elections from our elected officials. Oh, you know what? There's one more thing I should have brought up, and I'm going to do it now. The situation with the Weston County Clerk. That was not voter fraud, so let's not put it in that category. That was in this yellow category on this graph, all right? It was an official that was not acting appropriately, right? So with that, you guys, that's what's going on in Wyoming elections. I would love for you to make your comments below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. God bless. Have a great Tuesday. I will be coming in you tomorrow, Thursday and Friday from Las Vegas. Thursday, you know what? Tomorrow we're just going to talk about what's going on in world news and stuff like that. It'll be a great time. Thursday, I'm going to talk about education. Friday, I actually was going to talk about my story, but it occurred to me that I'm not going to be home. And I would like to tell my story with my family. So I'm actually going to do the story with my family on the following Friday. This Friday, I'm going to talk about, there's a lot of you who are concerned that my faith will somehow negatively affect your freedoms. And I'm going to talk to you about that. And I'm going to explain to you how my faith actually will benefit your freedoms. So God bless you guys. Take care. Until next time.
Sun up shining on a gravel drive. Granddad's coffee in a styrofoam cup. Says, boy, this world will tell you keep what's yours. But that ain't how we were brought up. We bow our heads at the table, thank the Lord for the food and the fight. 'Cause loving folks who love you back is easy, but that ain't walking in the light. Love your neighbor, mow his yard when he's hurting. Love your brother when he's slamming your door. Love the stranger when your pride says ignore him. Love the bitter heart twice what you did before. You can love your friends on Sunday morning, but Jesus taught a different kind of war. If you really want to shake this world for heaven, love your enemies more. highlighter on every other page says turn the other cheek, ain't just a slogan. It's a narrow road you gotta pave. We pass the plates and the casseroles, fix a porch where the storm goes through. When they curse your name, you hit your knees, say Father bless them like you do. Love your neighbor, mow his yard when he's hurting. Love your brother when he's slamming your door. Love a stranger when your pride says ignore him. Love the bitter heart twice what you did before. You can love your friends on Sunday morning, but Jesus taught a different kind of war. If you really want to shake this world for heaven, love your enemies more. Yeah, your enemies more. She's got a Bible with a cracked leather spine, highlighter on every other page says turn the other cheek, ain't just a slogan. It's a narrow road you gotta pay.
You pass the plates and the casseroles, fix the porch when a storm rolls through. When they curse your name, you hit your knee,
Say Father bless them like you do.